biggest question I had coming at me for this morning is, what is this topic about? I think 10 people must have asked me when I walked into the college itself, not excluding the secretary of the college. And my response was that this is another idea worth spreading. The idea itself is about 2 decades old. And that's something which I'd like to share with you 2 decades later. My first exposure to Western primary education, as I now know it, was a bit of a culture shock. I was in the UK visiting relatives, and I had a niece who came up to me and asked me a strange question. Now, to me, somebody who is a son of a well-known educator, an educated person himself, well-established in a profession, in a knowledge business, I had the arrogance to believe that I knew what it took to succeed. And this little girl changed that in the space of 10 minutes. So here I was drinking my tea in the morning in a house in the UK. And she comes up to me and says, what are you doing? I said, I'm reading the paper. Would you like to see my homework, Uncle Ramesh? I said, of course I'd like to see your homework series. And she opened up a notebook, which obviously was a school notebook. And she says, here it is. So I opened up the book and I said, so where's your homework? And here it is. And on 2 pages across were 8 questions. I said, okay, that's good. So have you done your homework? We're all Indians sitting in this hall, right? I'm an Indian sitting there with my notions, preconceived notions. I said, where's your homework? So she said, well, I've done it. And then she goes away. After a little while, she comes and says, so did you see my homework? Did you like it? I said, well, I saw what was in the pages, but I didn't see your homework. Where is the homework? I said, Uncle Ramesh, this is the homework. I still don't get it. So this little girl says, this guy, not worth talking to. And then it hit me that those actually were 8 questions produced by her. And then she explained to me that the teacher the previous day had read out a story or a chapter. And all the students in the class, she was 8 then, were meant to actually put down 8 questions based on the story that was read. And that hit me in the stomach, in the solar plexus, and moved a lot of my notions. So education was about asking, not about learning as we know it. By the end of the day, a very curious question had come to me. And I thought, when I was invited for this talk, that I should share that question 20 years later with this audience. I asked myself whether the orientation and the education that we are given prepares us more to be a spelling bee or a bumblebee. And that's the question that I want to put before all of you today. I'm sure most people in this room are familiar with what a spelling bee is, right? It's where you showcase your ability to spell the most difficult, uncommon words in the dictionary. And here's what's interesting. 11 national US spelling bee championships in the last 15 years have been won by Indian American students. And we're very proud of that. My sister who's in Canada and works in a bank keeps telling me, you know what? All of us Indians are very, very good at domain expertise. They're absolutely tops. No one can touch us. But after that, you ask us to take a decision, we just can't do it. Because the complex idea of taking a decision does not come by being a good spelling bee. And I use this in the broader sense of the word. By being good at maths, by being intelligent, by being articulate, by being assertive, it doesn't help. Decision-making is a completely different complex idea. Let's look at the bumblebee. That's another curious animal. By the laws of aerodynamics, by the laws of physics, a bumblebee is not meant to fly. I won't get into the details, I'll spare you the details of why not. But simply this, that it's not meant to fly. But guess what? The bumblebee doesn't know it, and therefore it continues flying. And I ask this audience, would you prefer to be a bumblebee, or would you prefer to be a spelling bee? I didn't have any doubts. Even if I ask for a show of hands, this answer will be the same. We all would like to have the freedom of thinking of a bumblebee. What is the significance of being a bumblebee but? That's important. For my money, the big heart is always going to win over the big mind. But we are taught to believe that you must build a bigger and bigger mind for some reason. We're taught to believe it in our homes, in our playing fields, in our classrooms, and in our offices. So I asked the question to two people who came to our office quite recently. These two people were two businessmen, both running reasonably well-recognized businesses. And both came to the office, same day, back to back actually. So it's quite strange contrast, which is what I was telling my colleague who's here with me. Both had good businesses, and both wanted to build world-class businesses. The first gentleman walked into the room, sat over there, and gave us a brief. And his notion was, you know what? I have lots of questions. I'm an uneducated North Indian salesman. I don't know much. The second guy, equally successful business so far. He had a very well-recognized global management education. And his challenge was, can you help me to exploit or leverage my management education to meet my business ambitions? One person had all the answers. One person had all the questions. Who would you bet on? One person worked entirely with his heart, and the other person was depending totally on his mind. Who would you bet on? I thought so. But here's the point. If you take this to the next level and think of it in the context of three people who I think nobody in this room would have any doubts about who they are, let's examine their lives. Any doubts who these people are? In fact, two of them were disciples of, the other two were disciples of Mahatma Gandhi. They were all cut from the same cloth. And all the three of them entirely changed the direction of their nations. And that's a big thing, because you're talking about billions of people being really redirected by the course of events directed by these three people. They all changed their nations with their hearts. Not to the exclusion of three very powerful minds, but these minds were slaves to the heart. They led with the heart. Do you agree with that? A colleague of mine who's in the audience once asked me this question. I think it was a couple of years ago. She asked me, do you know what Thomas Alva Edison, the gentleman in the picture, what was his greatest contribution to mankind? I knew it was a trick question, because she wouldn't ask me a question otherwise. I knew of his inventions, I knew he started GE, but what was his greatest contribution to mankind? And she tells me that he discovered 3,000 ways how not to make a light bulb. He discovered 3,000 ways in which not to make a light bulb. If any of you remember J.K. Rowling's famous speech at Harvard in 2008, she said, do we really teach our children and our societies the benefit of failure? Because after the three important aspects of what I call the big heart, one is empathy, the second is imagination, and the third is courage. After empathy, imagination, you have to have the courage to pick yourself up each time when you fail. No magic wand is going to give you success overnight. You can think of other people. Do you think of Steve Jobs? Do you think he worked with the heart or the mind? Was he more heart or more mind? Think of Abraham Lincoln. Was he more heart or more mind? Think of any number of people. Walt Disney. He was in utter poverty. He almost couldn't finish his first film, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. Was he more heart or more mind? I'd like to finish this argument through the lens of one life, which is not so commonly spoken about, a gentleman whom we all don't normally speak about in the same breath as some of the names that we spoke about a little earlier. He's somebody actually who changed the way in which a backward nation looked at its women. He's somebody who really, literally put his money where his mouth is. And he's somebody who was recognized in 2007 by the Nobel Committee for his contribution to world peace of all things. He is Dr. Muhammad Yunus, and he began what we now know as the Grameen Bank. Almost 10 million borrowers, all below the poverty line. 97% of them are women. 1% delinquency. That means only 1% of bad loans, right? There's an interesting story about how the Central Bank of Bangladesh challenged him. Why is so much of your money going to women? In a society like Bangladesh, it's an important question. It's a politically correct question. Why so many men, so many women? Women don't know how to run businesses, so why do you give it to them? Difficult question to answer, and it's coming from the bureaucracy. So he wrote a letter back saying that, you know what, I'm happy to answer this question. If you could tell me why 98% of the loans of other banks go to men, which is also bias. My question is, what do these bumblebees have for us as fellow parents, as educators and leaders, as lessons for teaching our young people? What actually is the current narrative in education today? It's about intellect, it's about power, it's about winning, and above all, it is about the notion of money as your central scorekeeper. Is there any place for the different aspects of what a bumblebee does, of the big heart? Is there any place for empathy? Is there any place for imagination in our education? Is there any place for courage? I ask you that. And it's worthwhile to take a lesson from, for example, the Singapore government, which most recently has made it mandatory to teach EQ in primary schools. IQ is not enough. Think about whether it is worthwhile to extend the new CSR law in this country into schools. That a percentage of your marks, a percentage of your time as a kid, must be spent and evaluated for CSR. Think about whether it is worthwhile to introduce credits for failing in some way. Would that be worthwhile? I'd leave you to think about it. And therefore, in conclusion, I would like to leave you in the 50th year of the anniversary of the civil rights movement in the US with this thought. To paraphrase Dr. King, I have a dream. I have a dream that our children will be schooled only by the tenets of empathy, imagination, and courage. I have a dream that one day our young people will be judged not by the strength of their intellect, but by the size of their heart. God bless. Thank you very much.